"You don't deserve to step into my family's house, Lena. You're just a clingy woman who lives off begging money from men." Isabella Price spat each word like a slap across her face. Evan stood by with arms crossed, looking at her with an expression of chilling disgust. That night, Lena opened her phone and saw a message from Evan. "It's time. 25 years is more than enough." 25 years of sacrifice, 25 years of building a family, only to be trampled on because of a young secretary who had barely started at the company. Serena staged a cheap jealousy scandal, painting herself as the victim to gain Evan's sympathy. And together, Evan, Serena, and Isabella sat down to plan the ultimate humiliation, turning Lena's anniversary night into a public execution of honor, announcing a divorce to seize her assets. But when the anniversary night arrived, before they could even speak, images of the affair appeared on the large screen. Lena stepped onto the stage beneath the spotlight, holding high the property ownership certificate the house legally registered under the name Lena Sterling. "You and your mistress are kindly asked to vacate my property." In that moment, Isabella Price was stunned into silence. She finally realized that the daughter-in-law she had scorned for 25 years was in fact the rightful heir to a multi-million-dollar estate and the only one with the authority to throw both her and her daughter out onto the street. What state are you in? If you were Lena, would you have the clarity to strike back like that? Want to see how a silver anniversary turned into a nightmare? Leave a comment and hit subscribe now, because that unmasking moment left the whole room breathless. Lena Sterling turned 50 with a life many would quietly envy. Her 3 children were grown, kind-hearted, and each one a source of pride. And Evan Price, her husband, the man both friends and colleagues hailed as the epitome of success, still carried the calm, courteous demeanor that women once dreamed of. In the eyes of others, Lena was a fortunate woman, a wife in a rare and steady marriage. During gatherings with friends, people often told her how lucky she was that men like Evan were hard to find nowadays. Lena would smile at those words, sometimes even convincing herself that her journey beside him had indeed been a warm and fulfilling one. After 25 years together, she had grown used to Evan, remembering her birthday, always showing up at the right moment without her needing to say a word. It was this quiet attentiveness that made Lena believe their marriage had stood firm against the test of time. But that sense of stability began to crack in the smallest of ways. One evening, when Evan stepped away from the dinner table to take a call, Lena happened to see him change his phone password. He used to keep it as their wedding date. It had always been a little tradition, a sentimental marker, and a quiet joy for her. Changing the password wasn't a big deal, but the speed and intention behind it made Lena pause. At night, Evan no longer wrapped his arms around her like he used to. He slept, turned away, breathing gently without acknowledging the person beside him. Even in the mornings when he used to wake up early to make her coffee, he now left the house silently, the spot beside her still cold. Lena told herself perhaps it was just work stress, but her instincts whispered something deeper had shifted. Another evening, Evan returned from a business trip. He kissed her lightly on the cheek and placed his coat on the chair. When Lena picked it up to hang it in the closet, she noticed a scent clinging to the fabric. It wasn't his familiar warm, woody cologne, but the soft sweetness of Chanel Coco Mademoiselle, something Lena had never worn. The unfamiliar fragrance lingered so clearly that it couldn't be mistaken. She stood still, coat in hand, listening to the sound of Evan showering in the other room, a strange, unnameable weight swelling in her chest. Lena wasn't someone who doubted her husband easily. She had spent half her life with Evan, knew his habits, the way he reacted, the way he laughed, the way he worried. But Evan's recent changes were no longer about stress. His eyes, when they met hers, no longer held the familiar light. Instead, they reflected a tired, distant gaze. When she tried to ask, Evan brushed it off with vague replies. The youngest child's birthday fell on a weekend night. The whole family was busy preparing, the kids excited to finally celebrate at home after so many years. Lena decorated the living room, got the child's favorite cake, and while working, hoped Evan would arrive just in time to join the candle blowing like always. But he sent a single brief message. He was busy, not to wait. No explanation, no rescheduling, no desire to join the family's joy. Lena held the phone for a long time, her heart heavy, yet still tried to believe her husband was simply caught up with work. When the party ended, she cleaned up in silence. Balloons still floated around the room, the children's laughter echoing in a house that now felt strangely empty. Lena looked at the chair where Evan usually sat during family gatherings, and it felt like that empty seat was telling her something she wasn't ready to admit. A growing distance was taking shape. In the days that followed, Evan became even more distant. He avoided family dinners, excused himself for sudden meetings. His schedule grew so packed that Lena often didn't even know where he was. Every time she tried to plan a romantic evening, he'd casually say he was tired and suggest another time. She looked into her husband's eyes, searching for a trace of the gentleness she once knew, but all she saw was hesitation and guardedness, as if he were deliberately avoiding her gaze. One cold evening, Lena sat in her usual chair in the living room, replaying everything that had happened. She wondered whether a 25-year marriage could really begin to fall apart from just a few small changes, or whether something deeper, something she hadn't dared to confront, was unraveling. The unease consumed her, keeping her awake night after night. Still, Lena chose to believe in the good because she knew that the moment she gave in to suspicion, her family would no longer be the peaceful place she had tried so hard to preserve. Late that night, after Evan had fallen asleep, Lena unconsciously reached for her phone. The screen lit up in the dark room, illuminating her pensive face. A new notification appeared from Evan's number. Lena assumed it was just a reminder or work-related note. She opened the message, but her eyes froze for a moment before a sharp sting struck her. The words stood clear before her. It's time. 25 years is enough. No explanation, no name of a recipient, just that single curt sentence. Lena stared at the glowing screen, her hand slowly growing cold. She read it again, as if hoping the words would change into something kinder, but they didn't. The message remained a cold, final decree. In the still room, Lena sat motionless, her heart grasping at something. She didn't know who Evan had sent it to, didn't know what its time meant, and even less why it was sent at that moment. Something broke inside her, and in that same instant, Lena began to understand that the small changes she had been ignoring were no longer random. She clenched the phone in her hand, took a deep breath, and stood up, the floor beneath her seeming to shift slightly. On the screen, Evan's message remained, waiting for an answer Lena wasn't ready to give. She looked down the dark hallway, wondering how her 25-year marriage would end, and knowing the answer was standing just beyond that door. The house had fallen silent when Lena jolted awake in the middle of the night. She didn't know what had stirred her, only felt a deep unease crawl down her spine. Beside her, Evan lay still, his breathing unusually steady. Lena glanced at the clock, the minute hand inching forward in the dim haze. She tried to close her eyes again when the slightest rustle on the bed startled her once more. Evan sat up so quietly that Lena could barely hear his breath. He slipped out of bed with deliberate care, making sure not to produce a sound. The door creaked open, a sliver of hallway light spilled in, then vanished as Evan stepped out. Lena stayed still, eyes half open, feeling as though something was pulling her from the rare, peaceful sleep she had managed to find. A minute passed, then two. The silence grew taut. Lena decided to leave the bed. Her bare feet touched the cool wooden floor, sharpening her senses. She gently cracked open the bedroom door, careful not to make a noise, and looked down the hallway. A faint yellow glow spilled from the living room, stretching a thin trail of light. Lena crept forward, holding her breath with each step. When she reached the bend in the hallway, she froze as Evan's voice came through, low and urgent. He wasn't speaking in the tone he used at home. It sounded secretive. She leaned just far enough to glimpse the living room without being seen. Evan stood with his back to her, a phone pressed tightly to his ear. She was about to retreat when Isabella's voice rang out from the speaker, cold, dry, and sharp as a blade. Lina's breath caught. This wasn't a work call. This wasn't a normal family conversation. Just from the tone, she knew it was the kind of talk they never wanted her to hear. Evan spoke slowly but clearly. The silver anniversary night, everything has to go according to plan. She won't suspect a thing. Lena reached for the wall to steady herself, her chest tightening. Every word in that sentence made her go cold. But before panic could fully form, Isabella's voice cut in, commanding and crisp. She spoke like issuing an order. "You need to be decisive. You're 52 now. Don't waste more time." That word decisive stunned Lena. What were they talking about? What plan on the anniversary night? Why call it a waste of time? She tried to connect it to things that had happened recently, but nothing was clear enough to make sense. Evan replied in a hushed tone, as if trying to reassure his mother. "I know, just need to get through that night." Lena closed her eyes for a second. Evan's voice was calculated, one he had never used with her. It felt like a stone had dropped into her stomach. But when Isabella answered with confident authority, Lena instinctively took a step back. "Just do exactly what we discussed. Don't grow soft." That word soft made Lena open her eyes. What did they mean? What did Evan need to be decisive about? What were they planning without her knowledge? Evan paused for a few seconds, then sighed. "I understand. It's time." Lena was plunged into a fog of chaotic thoughts. Doubts from previous days resurfaced, this time mingled with fragile hope. She told herself maybe they were planning a surprise for their 25th anniversary. Maybe Evan wanted to move her. Maybe he was arranging something so big he needed Isabella's help. That hope, thin as a spider's thread, was the only thing keeping her upright. She returned to the bedroom before Evan ended the call, afraid that if she heard more, she wouldn't be able to face him calmly. As she lay back in bed, her mind swirled with theories. She tried to shut her eyes, but the pounding of her heart shattered the illusion of peace. Evan returned a few minutes later. The door clicked shut so softly that Lena knew he didn't want to wake her. She kept her eyes closed, breathing steadily as if asleep. Evan stood beside the bed for a moment. Lena felt a swirl of emotion rise inside her. She wanted to turn and ask him, wanted to say she had heard everything, wanted to demand an explanation. But in that moment, she realized she wasn't ready for any of the answers. Evan sat down on the bed and looked at her. Lena could feel his gaze, could sense the invisible distance between them, a distance she had tried to cover with hope for so long, but now it was suffocatingly real. Evan spoke softly, almost to himself. "Just one more week." Lena heard every word. It didn't sound like anticipation for a surprise. It sounded like a reminder of a plan that had to be completed. Her heart sank. One more week. One more week until the silver anniversary. One more week until the day she had been waiting for. One more week until he and his mother needed to be decisive about something she didn't understand. Evan lay down beside her, back turned, erecting a silent wall between two bodies that once fit so closely. Lena opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of that conversation. Each shard carried unease, but she clung to the hope it was all a misunderstanding. She decided to wait. Wait a few more days to see if Evan's behavior has changed. Wait to see if he was truly preparing something for her. Wait to see if that cold voice in the hallway was simply a different tone of surprise or the prelude to something worse. Evan breathed steadily, but Lena couldn't sleep another minute. The night dragged on heavy as stones sinking into deep water. The echoes of that conversation haunted her, mixed with the ticking of the clock. In that moment, Lena felt she was standing at the edge of a truth she wasn't ready to face. A truth waiting at the end of the road that led to the anniversary night. And she knew, no matter how long she avoided it, the time would come when she would have to open her eyes and face it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, making Lena wake up later than usual. Her mind was heavy from a night filled with restless thoughts. Evan had left early, the pillow beside her still faintly warm. Lena sat up, her chest hollow, as she recalled the words Evan had muttered the night before, thinking she was asleep. Just one more week. That sentence echoed like a countdown to something she dared not imagine. She went to the kitchen to make coffee. As the machine whirred to life, her phone screen lit up on the table. She meant to check her schedule, but froze when her eyes caught a highlighted notification in the corner. A message from Evan forwarded to her device via their synced system. The sender was labeled H with a heart emoji. Lena's heart pounded violently in her chest. A second notification appeared beneath it. H sent 2 new messages. A chill shot down her spine. She had never seen that name in Evan's contacts. No one close to the family had a name beginning with H. She stared at the screen, her finger trembling, as if to open the message, but then stopped. She was afraid to face what was already too clear. She turned off the screen and tried to convince herself it could be work-related. A colleague maybe, a project group. She clung to those harmless possibilities, though the weight in her chest made every reassurance feel paper-thin. When she went online to check their bank account as part of her morning routine, a series of recent transactions left her frozen. Thousands of dollars had been withdrawn from their joint account in just 3 days. At Gucci, Cartier, and Tiffany, stores Lena had walked past but never considered because she wasn't the type of woman drawn to luxury. She scrolled through the transaction history. A sizable payment at Tiffany had gone through just the previous afternoon. Another at Gucci over the weekend. Each one is complete without notes. A sense of unease, sharp and heavy like a blade, began slicing through her thoughts. She leaned back in her chair to stay composed, but her mind was being stretched by 1,000 questions. She looked around the familiar kitchen. Every item here had been chosen by her hand. 25 years of building a home, never once letting Evan worry about anything beyond work. If those expenses were for gifts, he should have told her. If they were for something special, Evan would never have kept them secret. But everything happening lately contradicted the habits she knew so well. Lena walked to the laundry room, where she usually hung clothes fresh from the dryer. Light filtered through the door's gap and fell on the shirt Evan had worn the night before. The scent still lingered so vividly that she only had to bring it close to her face to notice. It was Gucci Bloom, a fragrance with a modern sweetness often worn by youthful, attention-catching women. She set the shirt down, closed her eyes for a moment to steady herself. That scent did not belong to her. It didn't belong in this house. It didn't belong to any memory from 25 years of marriage. That feeling was a silent yet merciless confirmation that Evan was living a life outside the framework she thought they had built together. Still, Lena tried not to jump to conclusions. She sat back down and pieced together all the signals from the heart emoji messages to the unexplained spending and the growing emotional distance. Part of her wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding, that Evan was under pressure and didn't know how to open up. But everything seemed to be lining up in a direction she didn't want to accept. She tried to recall how Evan had looked at her lately. There was an avoidance in his gaze, a lack of patience, a missing tenderness she used to recognize. At times, he looked past her instead of at her, as if she were merely a routine he had grown tired of long ago. That afternoon, Lena sat in the living room and heard Evan's car pull up. She knew she had to stay calm to see clearly what he wanted. She stood as the door opened. Evan entered with hurried steps, but what caught her eye was the elegant gift bag in his hand. A pale blue Tiffany bag with the signature ribbon, the exact store he'd used their joint account at. Evan set the bag on the table. Lena watched him closely, searching for any trace of hesitation or inner conflict. But Evan simply placed his keys down and exhaled. No smile to greet her, no questions. His eyes merely skimmed past her and landed on the gift. Lena gathered all her courage and asked in the softest voice she could manage, "Who is it?" For Evan looked at her, his expression calm enough to make her chest tighten. "Someone special." The answer froze the entire room. Lena forced a faint smile to mask her real emotions. But Evan's eyes in that moment were not those of a man joking or planning a beautiful surprise. They were the eyes of someone who had already made his choice. Lena stood still for several seconds, her hand instinctively tightening. Evan had answered too directly. Nothing in his words hinted the gift had anything to do with her. And the way he uttered the phrase, "someone special," made her heart plummet into a cold, empty void. Evan turned away, picked up the gift, and walked out of the living room, leaving Lena with a storm of thoughts piling up inside her. She watched his back as he left, feeling like she was standing at the threshold of a bitter truth with no idea how to take the next step. That morning, Lena drove to Evan's company, hoping to find some peace in the volunteer work she'd continued doing for the Price Corporation. She needed to distance herself from the growing unease brought on by strange messages, the scent of unfamiliar perfume, and a series of unexplained expenses. Every thought led her to a conclusion she didn't yet dare to face. She believed that being around people might help quiet her fears. The company hallway retained its usual elegance, from the artwork lining the walls to the jasmine fragrance sprayed each morning by the cleaning staff. But today, Lena's steps were heavier than usual. Each footfall stacked another layer of thoughts. She passed the front desk with a smile, though that smile carried a sorrow that was hard to conceal. As Lena stepped into the elevator, a group of employees chatted behind her, mentioning Serena Hart. The name had come up frequently since the 28-year-old became Evan's new assistant. Lena only knew Serena through her staff photo and scattered descriptions, refined beauty, sharp demeanor, and unwavering confidence. But Lena had never seen her in person until today. When she turned into the main office area, Serena exited the conference room. A fitted beige dress hugged her toned figure, her long black hair sleek, her eyes cold and sharp, as if dissecting everything in view. She smiled politely at coworkers, but her glance at Lena carried a trace of scrutiny, assessing every detail about her. Lena could feel the concealed smugness in that smile. Lena walked faster, unwilling to dwell on the woman her instincts had warned her about. She just wanted to wash her face and regain composure before meeting with human resources. But that decision led her to the moment that would bring all her suspicions into sharp focus. The office restroom was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the air conditioner. Lena had just entered when a faint giggle echoed from one of the stalls. She was about to turn around when a voice made her freeze, her heart tightening. It was Serena's voice. Evan said once the silver anniversary passes, the house will be his. Lena stood motionless. Her breath stopped, strangled by invisible hands. Every word pierced her chest. What house? Whose? Silver anniversary. It was all exactly what Evan had murmured to Isabella the night Lena had awoken. The pieces were falling into place most cruelly. Another woman asked, curious, what about his wife? Serena laughed, her voice icy. She'll back off. Women like her are easy to read. Just push the right buttons and she'll let go. Lena took a step back, her hand trembling. She had to lean against the sink to keep herself upright. They were talking about her. They were planning her removal like a piece of furniture to be cleared for someone new. The sting of betrayal coursed through her body, making her eyes burn. But she bit her lip. She would not fall apart here. Serena continued, her voice laced with satisfaction. Evan said everything's ready. We just have to wait for the right moment. You'll see, he's ruthless when it comes to eliminating obstacles. Obstacles. Lena nodded slightly, an unconscious reaction. In their eyes, she had become an obstruction, despite the 25 years she had spent standing behind Evan supporting him. She swallowed the pain, but the humiliation surged through her like a rising tide. A door creaked open, and Lena immediately walked out, forcing her face into composure. She didn't look back. She knew if she saw Serena now, she wouldn't be able to control her fury. She needed to understand everything before confronting them. She needed to know what she was up against. Lena hurried to the elevator, her hand clenching her purse as if it were the only thing keeping her from exploding. Her heart pounded inside her chest. She could no longer rely on hope. What she had just heard was evidence, truth, not paranoia. Evan had a clear plan, and she was not part of it. Once home, Lena went straight to Evan's study. It was a room she rarely entered unless necessary. Tidy, meticulous, with files stacked neatly across the desk. Afternoon sunlight slipped through the blinds, casting pale golden streaks that gave the room a false sense of calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. She turned on the computer, but didn't know the password. Evan had changed it 3 weeks ago. She turned to the desk drawer where he kept important documents. It was locked, but Lina remembered he once hid a spare key in the bookshelf. She found it after a few minutes. Her hand shook slightly as she opened the drawer. Inside were folders, receipts, and a few large envelopes. She skimmed through them until her eyes locked on a black folder. She pulled it out, her breath catching at the first line. Divorce papers. Both her name and Evan's were printed clearly in the upper left corner. The effective date was uncomfortably close. Lena flipped to the next page. The asset transfer clause was in bold. Their house was listed under Evan's ownership once signed. Their joint savings were to be split under the terms he had proposed. Everything favored Evan. It took Lena a few seconds to recognize the attorney's name, Harrow Thorne, a lawyer she had never heard of, but the name chilled her, the same man Evan and Isabella had once mentioned while whispering in the dark. She touched the paper, and it felt colder than the air in the room. Lena took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She read through every clause Evan intended to impose. One part of her ached, but another rose fiercely. The betrayal transformed into a silent strength, sharp as a blade. She stood upright, staring at Evan's office with different eyes. The truth was laid bare before her. She no longer had to wonder. She no longer needed to reassure herself with excuses on Evan's behalf. She had seen enough, heard enough, and understood enough to know her marriage was being pushed to the edge by her own husband and mother-in-law. Not because of her faults, but because of greed masked by calculated indifference. Lena held the folder, its weight heavier than it should be, as though it carried the burden of 25 years of betrayal. She knew she had just stepped onto a new battlefield, one with no space left for doubt or fragile hope. Lena left Evan's office with the folder in hand, her heart sinking into the pit of her chest. She needed an answer from the woman who had ignited all this chaos. Serena Hart wasn't the type to stay in the background and wait for someone else to speak. She had slipped into Lena's life step by step, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. If Lena wanted to understand how Evan and Serena had collaborated, she had to meet Serena face to face, even knowing the confrontation would be anything but smooth. That afternoon, Lena sent a brief message asking Serena to meet at the cafe near the company. She used no pleasantries, knowing Serena saw politeness as a weakness. When Lena walked in, Serena was already seated, spinning a silver spoon in her cappuccino. Her face was flawlessly made up, her gaze calm to the point of mockery. The meeting began with a heavy silence, each woman guarding her own thoughts, like two players well aware the chessboard had long been set. Serena set down her cup, tilted her head slightly, and spoke with a soft voice like an actress playing the role of the powerless. "You came to talk about Evan," she sighed, placing a hand on her chest as if her heart were breaking. "I love him with all I have. I know I have no right to ask, but please let me have him." The words were light as air, but sent a chill down Lena's spine, forcing her to press her hand to the table to stay composed. Lena stared at Serena for a few seconds, making sure she was serious. The performance was too smooth, too rehearsed. It felt like stepping into a badly written play with a masterful director. But what made Lena burn with fury was the way Serena said Evan's name intimately, as if she had already claimed him and Lena was merely in the way. Lena took a deep breath. The restraint she had carried for weeks now stretched to its breaking point. Serena leaned forward, her eyes glinting with pity mixed with triumph. "Evan deserves to be happy. He told me you no longer make him feel proud. I want to care for him, to give him the life he deserves." Her words, steeped in possession, cracked something inside Lena. Without replying, she reached for the glass of water and threw it straight into Serena's face, the splash smearing mascara into a dripping mess of black ink. Serena froze for a second, then slowly stood. When she looked up, the fragility was gone. Her eyes sharpened like blades. Her voice dropped cold and metallic. "You really think you still have a chance?" Each word cut through the air, thickening the tension between them. Serena looked Lena up and down as if assessing an opponent who had already lost her worth. The cafe door opened and footsteps sounded behind them. Evan appeared, looking irritated to find the two women in his life facing off. He walked quickly toward their table, unable to hide the frustration and a hint of panic, as if afraid Serena might suffer unfairly. But before he could speak, Serena moved as if pre-programmed by instinct. She grabbed Lena's wrist tightly, then slapped herself hard across the face. The impact turned heads. Serena collapsed into Evan's arms, sobbing, her voice trembling on the edge of collapse. "She hit me because I love you." It all happened too fast, too perfectly. Lena stood frozen, too stunned to respond, as Evan pulled Serena into his embrace like she had just survived a tragedy. Evan whipped around to Lena, his eyes blazing with fury, as though 25 years of marriage had never happened. He didn't wait for an explanation, didn't let her speak, didn't allow her even a breath. His hand lashed out, the slap echoing in the air like ice. "Don't disappoint me any further." His voice was sharp and cruel. The woman standing in front of him no longer meant more than a single tear from Serena. Lena turned her face away, the sting on her cheek not yet spreading before the humiliation engulfed her. The man who had once sworn to walk beside her for life had struck her down for a girl who had only just arrived. Serena still clung to Evan, weeping like a true victim. Her sobs were perfectly timed, perfectly delivered, as if practiced before a mirror countless times. Serena lifted her head and looked at Lena, her lips curving into a faint, taunting smile. That smile said everything was now in her hands, that Lena was just a bystander in a game she was already losing. Evan placed his arm around Serena's shoulders, whispered something that made her nod smugly. Together, they left the table, abandoning Lena in the middle of the cafe, with pain pounding in every heartbeat. Lena didn't follow. She stood still for a few moments, as if to fully absorb the fresh wound just inflicted. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It stood before her, spelled out in words, in actions, in Evan's slap. Lena walked out of the cafe, her breath heavy in her chest. Her patience had collapsed, replaced by something sharper, stronger, quietly taking shape. The afternoon sun hit Lena's eyes, but there was no warmth. She walked toward the parking lot, each step a storm of inner turmoil. But beneath the chaos, a different feeling was rising. She knew she had to fight back. She was no longer the wife trying to preserve a marriage, no longer the woman who believed in goodness. She had to become someone they never saw coming. As Lena opened her car door, a message from an unknown number lit up on her screen. The short sentence clenched her chest. A message from Serena herself. The silver anniversary, I'll remember it forever. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of war. The closing note to a meeting where power had temporarily tilted in Serena's favor, but Lena knew the battlefield was far from over, and the fight wouldn't end until the truth stood exposed before those trying to drive her into a dead end. Lena returned home, her cheeks still stinging from Evan's slap, but that pain was nothing compared to what awaited her in the living room. Isabella Price sat regally on the sofa like a queen waiting to sentence a treacherous servant. Her eyes swept over Lina with a chill, sharper than any cruel word Lina had endured in her 25 years as a daughter-in-law. The moment Lina stepped inside, Isabella stood her heels striking the floor with deliberate rhythm as if marking the cadence for an execution. Before Lina could speak, Isabella lunged forward, her shrill voice slicing through the still room. "You really are the kind of woman who clings to a man, still don't know your place." Each word struck like a poisoned needle. She closed the distance between them, her breath brushing Lena's face with deep disdain. "This house belongs to my family. You've lived here out of the Price family's charity." Lena stood still, breathing evenly. Isabella seemed only bolder in the face of silence. "My son's success is because of me, my upbringing, my connections. And what are you compared to the relationships I've built?" She yanked Lily's hair bun from the table and flung it aside like worthless trash. "You should leave before Evan has to get his hands dirty. It's pitiful how an old woman like you still clings to self-respect." A rush of heat surged through Lena, but she bit her lip, holding back. The insults weren't new, but today they carried a different weight. For the first time, Lena saw it clearly. Isabella had always viewed her as disposable, waiting for the right moment to cast her aside. And now, in her eyes, that moment had come. Isabella turned her back and waved a hand dismissively. "You're worthless. Evan's been done with you for a long time. The silver anniversary will be your finale. Get ready." Lena stood frozen, yet something inside had snapped, a boundary breached. 25 years of endurance, silence, harmony, of believing a little goodwill could salvage a family no longer held meaning. Evan's betrayal was one thing. Isabella cornering her was the real knife through her chest. Lena turned and walked to the bedroom, her stride so firm it surprised even her. The door shut behind her, silencing Isabella, but not the choking ache in Lena's chest. She leaned against the wardrobe, eyes fixed on the ceiling. From deep within memory, her father's voice returned low and steady. "You're stronger than you think. When cornered, a Sterling never backs down." That voice today was a spark. Lena stood, opened the safe in the room's corner, the one only she knew the code to. Evan never asked, always assuming she had nothing of value to hide. Her fingers traced the cold steel as she turned the dial, feeling something shift inside her. When the door clicked open, the ceiling light glinted off stacks of documents, making them glow brighter than usual. First came a thick folder, stamped in German, confirming Lena's inheritance of over $3 million from her late aunt on her father's side. A small investment portfolio, a savings account, and 2 additional funds quietly accruing for years. Next was the deed to a Munich apartment, then the title for a waterfront condo in Miami, real estate, among the city's most valuable. Lena brushed the edge of the page, a wave of sweetness and bitterness rising in her chest. Then came the page that made her pause. The ownership certificate for the very house Isabella claimed belonged to the Price family. But in the bottom left corner, bold and clear, stood one name only: Lena Sterling. This was a gift from her parents before she married Evan. The Price family had zero claim. Lena laid her hand on the documents, feeling the dense layers beneath her fingers. They weren't just proof of independence, they were a direct response to Isabella and Evan. In that moment, Lena realized they had never truly known her. They saw only a woman managing the household, never imagining the solid foundation behind her that she had never flaunted. The trembling vanished, replaced by a sharp clarity. Lena shut the safe, locked it, slung a bag over her shoulder, and left the room. Her first task was clear: find a lawyer, not the Price family's attorney, but someone loyal only to her. Someone who could see through exactly what Evan and Isabella were orchestrating. That afternoon, Lena met with Aiden Rowe, an old family friend and attorney. His office was modest but tidy and discreet. Aiden was a man of few words, but his eyes were razor sharp. As Lena recounted every detail from Serena and Evan to the anniversary plan, his brows furrowed again and again. "They've prepared things this thoroughly," Lena nodded, sliding the documents across the desk. "Evan already drafted the divorce papers. He wants the house transferred to his name. And my mother-in-law wants me out like discarded furniture." Aiden opened the file, flipping through each page. With each turn, his breath grew heavier. "Lena, this isn't just divorce. This is a coordinated attempt to seize assets. They're manufacturing emotional shock to corner you into signing away everything." Lena straightened her back, her voice firm. "I won't let them do it." Aiden studied her as if measuring the depth of her resolve. "You have 3 options. 1, file for divorce first and cut off Evan's next move. 2, gather hard evidence and fight back legally. 3, expose everything at the moment they plan to strike." Lena sat quietly for a few seconds, emotions rippling beneath the surface. Images of Serena clinging to Evan's chest, Isabella hurling insults, and Evan striking her in the cafe flashed through her mind like a broken film reel. She couldn't allow this to go on, and she couldn't let her 3 children witness their mother being humiliated again. "First, I want financial security," Lena said. I want to transfer all my inherited assets to a private account, and I want to separate our joint finances so Evan can't keep spending on Serena. Aiden nodded without hesitation. I'll walk you through it, and from now on, Evan must not learn of a single move you make. That evening, Lena returned home a changed woman, calm but sharper than ever. She opened her laptop, logged into the bank, transferred each fund to independent accounts, and saved every receipt Evan had spent on Serena. The evidence began to take shape, clear as a map. Each transaction was a knife Evan had forged against himself. Under the soft yellow light, Lena filed the documents into a dedicated drawer. She stood and looked around the spacious room. This house where she had lived, raised children, trusted, and endured no longer held love. It had become a battlefield. And she, whether she liked it or not, was now the one bearing the shield. The next morning, Lena met Aiden again. He had already drafted an action plan and handed her a USB to store key files. He showed her how to record audio, store data, and secure her information. If they want to fight, we'll fight on the battlefield they're most confident in, Aiden said calmly. Public. Lena looked at him. You really think I should do that? Aiden placed both hands on the desk, leaning slightly forward. Lena, they chose to strike you in front of everyone. If you want to walk away quietly, I can help. But if you want them to pay for what they've done, there's only one way. Lena held his gaze, seeing not pity but respect for her choice. What way? Aiden answered, in a voice clear and sharp as metal scraping stone. Do you want to disappear quietly, or do you want the world to witness the truth? Lena sat upright, her hands placed firmly on the desk. A heaviness passed briefly across her face, then vanished. She looked at Aiden, her voice calm like a final verdict. I want the light. Lena left attorney Aiden Rowe's office in a completely different state than when she arrived. The days that had passed had stripped away the last remnants of fragility in her, leaving behind a cold, clear steel shell. When she returned home, the silence that blanketed the space felt like a warning. Evan wasn't there. Neither was Isabella. The vast house now resembled a grand stage just moments before the most critical performance of Lena's life. She went straight into her study and shut the door. The small wooden desk by the window had become her evidence command post. Every piece of the betrayal that had stretched over the past months had been gathered there one by one, not a single detail missing. Lena opened her laptop, inserted the blank USB drive Aiden had given her, then laid out the stack of documents she had compiled throughout the week. The first file she uploaded was the affair video. A blurry clip from a restaurant camera where Evan and Serena had once sat closely whispering about the future. Another clip showed the two leaving the parking lot in a state no one could deny. Lena watched the footage, her heart heavy, but her composure was disturbingly steady. The pain had long passed its threshold. Now only one purpose remained. The truth must be exposed. Next came the bank statements. Lavish purchases at Gucci, Cartier, Tiffany appeared one after another. Lena compiled everything, time-stamped each entry, and cross-referenced them with the days Evan claimed to be in meetings or on business trips. Everything lined up in a flawless pattern he thought would never be uncovered. She saved the file, named it clearly, every number a blade waiting to be unsheathed. Then came the contract, drafted by attorney Harrow Thorne, a thick document worded with blatant greed, aiming to push Lena out of the home her parents had left her. She ran her fingers along the columns of text as if memorizing each line Evan once expected her to sign. The document was scanned and backed up, ready to be used in any unforeseen circumstance. Lena opened the drawer and took out the secret phone Aiden had provided. Inside was a recording of Serena speaking about Evan's plan, her voice dripping with manipulation that made Lina's skin crawl. Serena's tone was cold and calculated. By the silver anniversary, everything will be done. The house will be Evan's, and his wife shall take the hint and walk away. Lina replayed it to make sure it had saved properly. Every word was now irrefutable evidence. Finally, she placed the most important file on the USB, the property deed, with Lina Sterling listed as the sole legal owner. This was the linchpin that would dismantle Evan's entire scheme. It was also the one piece Isabella could never have anticipated. Lina saved an extra scan of it in a hidden folder, then closed the laptop. Looking at the neatly organized files now stored on the USB, Lina knew she was ready. That small device in her hand held not only a new life, but the blade that would end Evan and his mother's elaborate charade. Yet even in that moment of cold resolve, one question still lingered within her. That evening, as Lina descended the stairs, Evan returned home. He hung up his coat, removed his watch, carrying himself with a casual air, as if their marriage were still intact. But Lina could see the unfamiliarity in every motion. The man before her no longer resembled the husband who had once walked beside her through years of hardship. He was now just a hollow shell of the man who had vowed to stand by her for life. Lina drew a long breath and approached. Evan. She stood a few steps away, her gaze so calm it startled even her. Evan didn't look up, rummaging for his car keys. "We need to talk." Lina's voice didn't shake. It wasn't sad or angry, but resolute, the tone of someone who had lost all hope. Evan glanced at her annoyed. "Make it quick, I'm busy." Lina met his eyes. "Is there anything left between us? Anything at all?" Her voice was soft but unwavering. She wasn't pleading. She just wanted to know whether there was a shred of decency left in him. Evan laughed, a strange, raspy, dry laugh. He jerked his arm away when she reached for his sleeve. "Don't act." He snapped his eyes sharp like blades, offering her no room to speak further. "Whatever we had is long gone. Stop clinging to something that's already rotted." Lina stood still for a moment. A part of her, the last part that had hoped Evan might turn back, shattered into dust. He walked past her without a backward glance. Each step echoed down the hallway, making everything clearer than ever. Lina turned away, her lashes trembling, but not a single tear fell. She returned to the study, the light reflected off the mirror, revealing every trace of exhaustion, every invisible wound Evan and Isabella had inflicted. But as she looked more closely, Lina saw something else. Beneath the damage was a changed gaze, still, clear, cold as the sword ready to be drawn. The USB lay on the table, a tiny object, yet more powerful than all the words she had once tried to explain. Lina picked it up, held it before the mirror, her eyes unblinking. This was no longer a fight to save a marriage. This was a battle to reclaim the truth, the dignity, and the life that had been stolen from her bit by bit. Lina stared into her own reflection, her voice low and steady, speaking to the woman who had survived the ultimate betrayal. "Then let me perform the role properly." With that, she slipped the USB into her pocket, straightened her back, and walked out the door, not to plead. Not to explain, but to prepare for the silver anniversary stage where everything would be revealed. The grand ballroom blazed with light. Tables draped in white linen formed a sweeping arc, each adorned with white lilies and glimmering candles. Guests chatted cheerfully, enjoying their dinner while celebrating 25 years of what they believed to be a model marriage. Evan stood at the far end of the room, adjusting his collar with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Isabella sat at the central table, her face polished and her smile content, as if she were watching a ceremony honoring her son. Lina entered under a wave of admiring glances. Though her heart pounded in her chest, she maintained perfect composure. She knew everyone in that room believed Evan was the ideal husband, and she was the woman blessed by fortune. They had no idea what lay beneath the surface. Her footsteps seemed detached from the sounds around her. She could only hear her own steps steady and measured, like someone walking into a final battle. When the MC announced the speeches, Evan stepped onto the stage with the air of a man who had already won. He held the microphone and glanced at Lina, his smile calculated. The spotlight sharpened his features. Thank you all for being here. Today isn't just our 25th anniversary, it's also the day I speak a truth I've hidden too long. The room quieted, heads turned, anticipating a romantic confession. Evan paused, pronouncing each word carefully. I've endured 25 years. This marriage is over. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs. Some guests stood up in shock. Isabella sat upright, her hands resting on the table, lips curled in smug satisfaction, as if she were finally witnessing the scene she had long awaited. Evan went on, voice honed like a blade. We've changed. I no longer want to carry a relationship that holds no value, and from today I choose a new path. His eyes locked on Lina's as if daring her to collapse under the weight of his public verdict. But before Evan could continue, a shrill scream from the back of the room shattered the stage. Serena stormed down the aisle, red dress tangling at her feet, but moving fast like she meant to tear the scene apart. Enough! I can't take it anymore. You lied to me too! All eyes turned toward Serena, including those holding up their phones to record the unfolding spectacle. She pointed at Evan, eyes blazing. You promised me that house. You said tonight you'd make the announcement and I'd be your new partner. And now you act like I don't exist. The crowd buzzed louder, more phones lifted. Evan tried to stay composed, but fury flickered through his face. Serena, not now. His voice was low, each word biting. Serena shook her head violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. Not now. Right, because now too many people can see your lies. A wave of whispers swept the room, and more guests stood up to listen more clearly. Lina stood by her table, hand clutching her purse, eyes fixed on the two locked in a verbal clash on stage. She knew her moment had come. As Serena kept shouting about house promises, secret nights, and Evan's hidden spending, Lina stepped forward under the gaze of hundreds. Her steps were soft but unwavering, like she had rehearsed this moment her entire life. Evan turned eyes wide when he saw her approaching. Serena stepped aside, but her stare stayed razor-sharp on Evan. Lina seized the microphone from Evan with a firm motion that even the sound technician froze at. She brought it to her lips, voice calm yet resonant across the packed room. If we're speaking truth, then let me finish the rest. The crowd fell silent. Phones rose higher. Everyone realized this party had veered into uncharted territory. Lina opened her purse and pulled out a USB drive she had prepared for days. She placed it on the sound table, turning to the technician. Play every file in here. He hesitated, glanced at Evan, but Lina added, you play it. This is my party. Her voice wasn't loud, but sharp as a cut. The technician met her eyes for a few seconds, then nodded. A few taps and the large screen behind the stage lit up. The first video played. Evan holding Serena's hand as they entered a hotel, his head bent close to her ear. Whispers echoed. That's Evan, she's the new secretary. The next clip showed Evan holding Serena in a car, streetlights revealing their faces. Serena smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Isabella clutched her designer purse, face drained of color. But Lena wasn't finished. The screen switched to a bank statement. Charges at Gucci, Cartier, Tiffany, all clearly itemized. The large numbers drew gasps. Then came a contract prepared by Harrow Thorne. Evan Price's name stood out in the corner, and the asset transfer clause was enlarged for even the back row to see. Someone shouted, "That's a coerced signature." Another chimed in, "He was trying to take the house." Then Serena's recorded voice played, cold and cutting enough to make some women frown. "It'll be over after the silver anniversary. The house will be his. His wife will step aside." Serena's face turned pale. She backed away as if searching for an exit. Evan gripped the microphone, face frozen. Isabella leaned into her chair, eyes wide in panic, as secrets spilled out for all to see. Finally, Lena stepped forward, holding up a document she had kept in her safe for years. The spotlight hit the page, the print bold and clear. Owner, Lena Sterling. "This is the house you all tried to take," Lena said, her voice echoing across the room. "My private home, gifted by my parents before I married Evan Price." A few seconds of silence followed, as if the room needed time to absorb the storm that had just hit. Then Lena turned to Evan, eyes devoid of sorrow. "You and your mistress may now leave my property." The words exploded like a match thrown into gasoline. A group of guests stood and clapped. Others exclaimed, "Brilliant, incredible." Many now looked at Evan with undisguised contempt. Evan stumbled backward, microphone falling from his hand with a harsh screech. He collapsed into a chair, face ghost white, as though he had just lost everything. Serena stood beside him, lips trembling in fear, her forced arrogance shattered. Isabella clutched her chest, dazed, realizing her son had dragged their whole family into a pit. And yet, amid the chaos, Lena stood still. Not victorious, not boastful, just freed. She had said everything that needed to be said. And the night that was meant to break her became the moment her truth stepped into the light. The explosion at the silver anniversary night didn't stop at the lavish room where Lena exposed the truth with her USB. It spread like wildfire, catching a gust of wind. Within hours, videos posted by the guests began surfacing across multiple platforms. Footage of Evan holding Serena in a car, Serena screaming amid the crowd about the house he promised her, the divorce agreement, the audio of his plot to steal the house. Together, they formed a storm no one could contain. The next morning, Lena awoke in the quiet of her own room. She opened the window and took a deep breath. The sunlight no longer felt heavy as it had in recent days. But as she came downstairs, the house phone rang nonstop. The caller was none other than the Price Corporation's board of directors. They wanted to speak with Evan immediately. Lena realized his moment of reckoning was near. By noon, Price Corporation issued an urgent statement. The executive board convened on the 60th floor, the same place where Evan once stood like a king on his throne. But today, he was seated in the waiting room, head bowed, eyes swollen from a sleepless night. The conference room door opened. The CEO of their longtime partner firm entered clutching a thick report. He placed the file squarely in front of Evan, his voice as cold as steel. "We've reviewed all the footage. The company's reputation has suffered irreparable damage. You need to step down immediately." Evan lifted his head, pale-faced and trembling. "No, I can explain." But no one cared to listen. The senior executives looked at him with a mix of disappointment and contempt. The company's stock was plummeting. Headlines labeled him the adulterous CEO who abused power and seized assets. Each word landed like a hammer to the skull. Lena wasn't there, but she knew this had to happen. It wasn't revenge, it was the cost of everything he had done to her. While Evan drowned in chaos, another explosion was brewing. The media began digging into Serena Hart. Until then, there hadn't been much written about her. She had always maintained the image of a discreet professional newcomer. But after the scandal, everything was overturned, like a room hiding secrets behind every wall. An old photo surfaced, Serena posing with a senior executive from Price Corporation's direct rival. Just hours later, a leaked email emerged online. It was a covert employment contract listing Serena as an undercover operative. She had been planted inside Price Corporation with a mission to win Evan's trust, gather internal intel, sow disruption from within, and tarnish the CEO's image to pave the way for a corporate takeover. She had succeeded in dragging Evan into scandal, destabilizing leadership, and acquiring classified documents Evan had carelessly shared during their intimacy. When the press released the final piece, everyone was stunned. Serena wasn't just a secretary. Not just the other woman in a reckless affair. She was a trained corporate spy, cold, ruthless, and never in love with Evan. Every sweet word, every fragile tear she shed before him was a calculated move to fulfill her mission. Evan sat in his temporary rental, gripping his phone, eyes red with fury. He tried calling Serena, but her number had already blocked him. The messages he sent sat cold and gray. In his mind replayed the image of Serena crying before the crowd, accusing him of betrayal. Only now did he understand she hadn't cried from heartbreak. She had been pushing him off a cliff he could never climb back from. She destroyed him, using the very foolishness he had indulged in. As Evan spiraled, Isabella Price was no better. After witnessing Lena's revelation, she returned home in a panic. She couldn't believe the house truly belonged to Lena. Her entire life, she believed the Price family was the root and Lena an outsider. But now cornered, she had nothing left to hold on to. What she hadn't anticipated was the secret loan she had signed with attorney Harrow. Isabella had used her own private residence as collateral to funnel money for Harrow to prepare documents to seize Lena's house. But after Lena's USB destroyed the plan, Harrow immediately cut off contact. The bank sent new notices. With no valid collateral, the loan had been reclassified for immediate collection. Isabella went pale at the sight of the paperwork. She had never imagined losing her own home. Harrow, the man she trusted most, vanished as well. He severed all communication, leaving Isabella with a massive debt she couldn't pay. She sat for hours in the living room of the old house, clutching her head, her heart crushed. She had lost her path, her power, and the pride she had clung to for so many years. Meanwhile, Evan hid inside a small rental apartment, too ashamed to return home or face anyone. News broadcasts continued to report every development. The board was investigating his personal expenditures. Partners were canceling contracts en masse. Evan watched it all as if being stabbed repeatedly. In just 48 hours, his reputation, position, and career lay in ruins. He lost his job, lost his money, lost his house, lost his mistress, and lost any chance of holding a leadership role in the industry again. Rage consumed Evan like a wildfire. Only one name burned in his mind. One person had dared to bring him down. One woman he believed would always stay silent. Evan sprang from his chair, slammed the door open, gripped the steering wheel, and drove straight to Lena's house. In his mind, she was to blame for everything. He didn't think of what he had done, didn't recall the punch he threw at her face in front of Serena, didn't reflect on the schemes he secretly plotted. All he could feel was hatred. Lena was pouring tea when she heard tires screech outside. She walked into the living room wearing the same calm expression she'd had since the night of the anniversary. The door burst open. Evan stormed in like a madman. His face was flushed, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. He pointed at Lena, shouting with fury, "It's all your fault! Lena, you destroyed my life!" Lena didn't flinch. She stood in the middle of her own living room, one hand resting lightly on the wooden table, her gaze cool and unshaken. Evan grew more enraged, seeing she wasn't afraid like before. He stepped forward, fists clenched, nearly trembling with the urge to smash something. "If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have lost everything. I had a career, I had a future. You ruined it all." Lena looked at him, her eyes deep and still, like a glassy lake. She held her silence for a few seconds before replying, her voice not loud but sharp enough to slice through his roar. "No, you did." Lena Sterling's story began with silent fractures in a 25-year marriage, gradually exposing layers of betrayal hidden beneath the polished surface of a successful family. From Evan Price's cold indifference, the secret 2 a.m. conversations with Isabella Price, to the lavish bills Lena had no knowledge of, each became a signpost of a larger scheme. Lena still clung to hope, but that hope shattered the moment she overheard Serena Hart talk about seizing the house in the company restroom, no less. From then on, Lena's journey shifted from a wounded wife to a resolute woman gathering evidence and preparing to strike back. The night she confronted Serena marked the first glimpse into the filthy theater Evan and his mistress had orchestrated. A feigned weakness, a self-inflicted slap, and a false accusation led Evan to strike Lena right in front of Serena. But that blow was what awakened Lena's inner resolve. She returned home, faced Isabella, and endured the same insults she had suffered for years. But this time, Lena remained silent for a reason. She opened the safe and retrieved inheritance documents Evan and Isabella never knew existed: $3 million, 2 international apartments, and a deed proving the house belonged solely to her. From that moment on, Lena began compiling evidence, working with attorney Aiden to prepare for a public showdown. She saved every video, every contract with attorney Harrow, every bank statement, and audio clip of Serena confessing her plot. She gathered them onto a USB drive, forging it into the sharpest blade of her life. She once reached out to Evan, asking if there was anything left between them, but he slapped her hand away and called her a liar. And Lena stood before the mirror and whispered the line that mirrored her new state of mind: "Then let me play the role properly." Their silver anniversary night glittered with lights, but it became the stage where an empire of lies collapsed. Evan stood on stage and declared, "I've endured 25 years. This marriage is over," shocking the entire crowd. But the script he had written crumbled instantly when Serena stood up and accused him of deceiving her too. Chaos broke out. And in that moment, Lina stepped forward, took the mic, and said, "If the truth has begun, let me finish it." When the USB played on the giant screen, the entire scheme to steal the house, the divorce contracts favoring Evan, the affair footage, and the money transfers were exposed before hundreds of eyes. When the house deed bearing Lena Sterling's name was held up, the entire room fell silent in confusion. Lena ended with a line that shattered the air. "You and your mistress may now leave my property." Evan collapsed into his chair, face pale, while Isabella froze in shock, realizing she had backed a doomed plan from the start. Evan's downfall began immediately afterward. The video spread online, and the Price Corporation demanded his resignation. Partners severed contracts en masse. Meanwhile, Serena's true identity came to light. She was a planted asset from a rival company sent to destroy Evan's reputation with no genuine affection at all. Isabella also crumbled as the loan secured for Harrow was revoked, leaving her drowning in debt. Evan stormed to Lena's house, screaming that she had ruined his life. Lena replied with only one sentence, "No, you did that yourself." The story reached its final chapter when Lena left the house that had imprisoned her in years of pain. She moved into one of the international apartments, a sunlit, peaceful space. No more Isabella's scornful voice, no more Evan's shadow, no more societal roles that bound her to the image of the enduring wife. Lina's new life wasn't for revenge, it was for healing. One morning, Lina received a letter. Evan's handwriting. He wrote, "I'm sorry. You were the most valuable thing in my life. If I could turn back time, I'd start over." Lina read it, folded it, and tucked it into a drawer without anger, without sorrow. She had come too far to return. She now understood her worth and didn't need an apology to confirm it. While Lina rebuilt her life, authorities launched an investigation into Harrow. Illicit contracts, asset theft, and collusion with Evan were all uncovered. Harrow was prosecuted and stripped of his license. Serena vanished from the country, slipping into the shadows just as she had arrived, continuing a life of deception with secrets she would never reveal. Evan was left in ruin, his reputation destroyed, his career obliterated, and the bitter truth that no one wanted anything to do with him. As for Lena, in her new apartment, she stood on the balcony and watched the sunrise. Light spilled across the buildings, illuminating the eyes of a woman who had survived the darkest nights of her life. She whispered softly, as if greeting herself, 25 years, that's enough. Now it's my turn to live." But as she turned back inside, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. "We know you have a second USB. We need to talk." Lena stared at the message, her gaze sharpening slightly. She understood the story wasn't over. Behind Serena and Harrow, there may be another force she had never noticed. And this might be the beginning of a new battle. The lesson of this story for anyone reading: never underestimate the power of silence and inner strength in a woman. Lena was betrayed, insulted, and belittled, but she didn't retaliate with rage. She fought back with truth and intelligence. She rose when everything seemed lost and became the strongest version of herself. Remember this: silence is not weakness. Patience does not mean endless endurance. The truth always finds its voice. When you dare to step out of the darkness, you'll see just how wide the world truly is. If you want to continue following Lena Sterling's journey, don't forget to leave a comment, share your thoughts, and hit follow. Your support gives me the motivation to keep telling the second part, where the secrets behind the second USB will be revealed. And who knows, you might just find a piece of your own story in Lena's.